Ladies and gentlemen, there's one thing most people don't realize when dealing with a narcissist. The real battle isn't in what they say, it's in how they twist. They don't just argue, they confuse. They don't just deflect, they rewrite reality. And if you've ever walked away from a conversation with one feeling drained, doubting yourself, or wondering how the truth got so tangled, that's not an accident. That's their strategy. But here's the good news. You don't need to fight them with more noise. You don't need to lecture, to argue, or to explain yourself into exhaustion. All you need is clarity, because clarity is the one thing they can't stand. Clarity is what strips away the games and reveals exactly what they're hiding. And that brings us to the first truth you need to understand. Narcissists thrive on confusion. Clarity is their enemy. The reason for this is simple. Their power depends on keeping you off balance. If they can twist your words, shift the blame, or rewrite the story in a way that makes you doubt yourself, then they win. Confusion is their comfort zone. It's the fog they operate in. Because when you're disoriented, you're easier to control. When you don't know what's real, you're more likely to lean on their version of reality. And that is exactly where they want you. Think about it. A narcissist rarely gives straight answers. When confronted, they deflect. When asked for accountability, they minimize. When caught in a lie, they exaggerate or spin a new one. They'll tell you something happened when it didn't, or insist you said something you never did. They'll move the conversation in circles until you're exhausted. That's not accident, it's strategy. Every time you start to feel uncertain, every time you second guess what you know is true, you hand over a little more control. Confusion is their weapon, and they wield it with precision. But clarity dismantles their entire structure. When you start asking clear questions, when you insist on definitions, when you stop playing their word games, they lose footing because clarity removes the gray areas where they thrive. For example, if they insult you with something vague like, "You're always overreacting," a clear response, such as, "What specifically do you mean by always?" suddenly puts the burden back on them. They don't want to be pinned down, and they don't want to explain specifics because specifics can be measured, specifics can be disproven, and specifics expose their exaggerations. Clarity is powerful because it breaks the loop of emotional manipulation. Narcissists count on your emotions to cloud your judgment. They poke and prod until you react. They want you defensive, upset, flustered, because in that state, you're easier to confuse. But clarity is calm. Clarity is direct. Clarity doesn't take the bait. It doesn't get loud or emotional. It simply shines a light on what's actually being said. And when the light is on, their shadows disappear. The truth is, narcissists don't fear confrontation. They feed on it. They love drama because drama creates noise. And in noise, they can hide. What they fear is exposure. They fear the quiet strength of someone who won't play the game. They fear the person who keeps asking calmly and consistently for clarity, because the more you demand clarity, the more their tactics unravel. Suddenly, the manipulation that once felt convincing starts to look exactly like what it is. Smoke and mirrors. Clarity also protects you. It grounds you in reality when someone is trying to pull you into their distortion. When they tell you you're too sensitive, instead of shrinking or defending, you can respond with clarity. "What did I say that makes you believe I'm being too sensitive?" That shifts the weight of proof back to them. It forces them to either explain, which reveals their exaggeration, or back down, which exposes their lack of ground. Either way, you stay in control, because you refuse to get lost in confusion. And here's the beauty of clarity. It doesn't require you to outsmart them, outtalk them, or out-ick them. You don't need to match their games. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to provide long explanations, justifying yourself. You just need to stay grounded and ask simple, direct questions. Clarity isn't about proving yourself to them. It's about anchoring yourself in truth. And when you do that, their tricks lose power. Over time, clarity changes the dynamic. A narcissist will either escalate, trying harder to confuse you, or they'll retreat because clarity makes their usual tactics ineffective. And while they may never admit it, Deep down, they know clarity exposes them. That's why they'll accuse you of being difficult, stubborn, or argumentative when you insist on clear answers. That's why they'll try to make you feel guilty for not letting things slide. They want you to back down because they know the longer you stay clear, the less control they have. Clarity is also contagious. The more you practice it, the more confident you become in your own perception. You stop doubting yourself as much. You start noticing the patterns more quickly. You begin to see how often they contradict themselves, how often they avoid straight answers, how often they twist words. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. That's the turning point. When the fog lifts and you realize you're not crazy, you're not imagining things, you're simply being manipulated. That awareness is freedom. So yes, narcissists thrive on confusion. They need it. It's the oxygen to their fire, but clarity starves them. Clarity forces them to face their own words. Clarity takes away the shadows where they hide. And once you begin to live in clarity, you'll find their power shrinking, because confusion only controls you when you allow it to. The more you choose clarity, the less space manipulation has to grow. The right question shines a spotlight where they want shadows. Narcissists thrive in the dark corners of vagueness, half-truths, and hidden motives. They survive by keeping their intentions unspoken, their manipulation disguised, and their words slippery. That way, if you ever try to confront them, they always have room to twist, deny, or escape. Shadows protect them. Ambiguity is their shield, and the moment you shine a light, they scramble. Asking the right question doesn't mean asking 10 in a row or interrogating them with rapid-fire demands. It's not about overwhelming them. It's about precision. One well-placed question can do more than an hour of arguing, because while arguing feeds them, clarity exposes them, and a single question calmly delivered forces them into a corner where the truth has to be addressed. Think about how they usually work. They say something cutting, but they disguise it in a joke. They criticize you, but cloak it in vague language. They make an accusation, but leave it just unclear enough so you can't pin them down. That's not by accident. It's calculated. If you confront them emotionally, they'll say, "Relax, I was just joking." If you ignore it, they'll repeat it later. But if you shine the spotlight with the right question, something as direct as, "What exactly did you mean by that comment?" suddenly the game changes. Now they're forced to either backpedal, which reveals their weakness, or expose the true intent behind their words, which strips away their disguise. Either way, the shadows shrink, and that's what they hate the most. Being seen clearly. The right question also has power because it shifts the balance of control. Normally, a narcissist wants you explaining yourself, defending yourself, chasing after their approval. That's how they keep the upper hand. But when you ask a calm, clear question, you reverse the flow. They're the ones who now have to explain. They're the ones scrambling for words. They're the ones feeling the weight of attention. And attention, when it's focused on truth, is something they desperately avoid. You'll notice their discomfort almost instantly. Their answers get longer, more evasive. They'll try to turn the question back on you. They'll say, "Why are you making this such a big deal?" Or, "You always twist my words." That's just an attempt to drag you back into the shadows. But if you stay calm and hold the spotlight steady, you'll watch their tactics unravel. Because when the light is on them, they can't keep playing the same game. The brilliance of asking the right question is that it doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, the simpler it is, the stronger it becomes. Questions like, "Can you explain what you mean?" Or, "What makes you say that?" Or even, "How is that true?" don't sound aggressive. They sound curious, even respectful. But beneath that calm surface, they carry incredible weight, because those questions demand clarity. And clarity is the one thing a narcissist can't provide without revealing themselves. It's also important to notice what happens inside you when you start using questions instead of reactions. Suddenly, you're no longer on the defensive. You're not chasing. You're not proving. You're not explaining. You're steady. You're in control. And that shift is powerful because narcissists feed on reactions. But they can't feed on calm questions. A calm question is like a mirror. It reflects their behavior back to them without you needing to raise your voice. or lose your peace. And here's the key. The right question doesn't just expose them to you, it exposes them to anyone else watching. In group settings, this becomes especially powerful. Imagine someone throwing out a backhanded comment in front of others. If you get defensive, they'll frame you as overreacting. But if you calmly ask, "What do you mean by that?" the entire room turns to them for an answer. Now they're under the spotlight, and suddenly everyone sees what was hidden before. That's the moment the mask slips. Of course, they'll try to wriggle out. They'll laugh it off. They'll dismiss the question. They'll accuse you of being sensitive. But notice, they're not answering. And in not answering, they're answering because avoidance itself is exposure. Deflection itself is evidence. The spotlight reveals even what they don't say. Over time, asking the right question becomes less about catching them and more about protecting yourself. You stop walking into their traps. You stop giving them the fuel of confusion. You create boundaries without needing to announce them. And most importantly, you stop letting their shadows define your reality. The truth is, you don't need to shine a stadium light. You don't need to interrogate or attack. You just need a single, steady beam. One clear question, and it's enough to make the shadows scatter. Narcissists can manipulate in the dark, but they can't manipulate in the light. And every time you choose to shine that light, you reclaim a little more of your power. When you strip away excuses, truth stands alone. Narcissists are masters of excuses. Every mistake has a reason. Every broken promise has a story. And every time you try to hold them accountable, they shift the responsibility onto someone else. If they forgot something, it's because you didn't remind them. If they hurt you, it's because you were too sensitive. If they crossed the line, it's because you made them do it. Excuses are their shield. Excuses protect their image. And excuses, if you're not careful, can start sounding convincing. That's the trap. They know that if they pile on enough explanations, you'll get lost in the details. You'll spend your time arguing over the reasons, instead of holding them to the reality. But here's the thing. Reasons don't erase reality. A story doesn't change the facts. And no matter how many excuses they throw at you, the truth is still sitting there. It doesn't move. It doesn't shift. It doesn't disappear. When you strip away excuses, truth is what's left. Let's make this simple. Imagine someone repeatedly disrespects you. Every time you call it out, they have an excuse. I was tired. I had a stressful day. I didn't mean it like that. You're misinterpreting me. Now, each excuse might sound reasonable in isolation, but look at the pattern. The behavior keeps happening. The words keep stinging. The disrespect doesn't stop. That's because the excuse is just a distraction. It's meant to pull your attention away from the truth they chose to say or do something hurtful. This is why clarity matters so much. When you strip away the excuse and focus on the action, you can see the truth for what it is. Instead of getting caught up in their reasoning, you ask, "But did you say it?" Or "But did it still happen?" And that's the power of truth. It doesn't need dressing up. It doesn't need justification. Truth stands alone. And when you keep bringing the focus back to it, the excuses lose their weight. Narcissists hate this because excuses are their escape routes. Without excuses, they're exposed. They no longer get to hide behind stress, misunderstanding, or circumstance. They're forced to face the fact that their choices were just that, choices. And accountability is something they spend their lives running from. That's why they'll double down, create bigger stories, or even flip the script to make you feel guilty for questioning them. But no matter how elaborate the excuse, the truth is still sitting there calmly, unmoved, waiting to be acknowledged. And here's where your strength comes in. You don't need to argue against every excuse. You don't need to counter every point. You don't need to explain why their reasoning doesn't hold up. That just drags you deeper into the fog. Instead, you strip it back, bring it to the core. Did they do it? Did they say it? Did it happen? If the answer is yes, then the truth speaks for itself. Think about how freeing that is. You don't have to be the detective who disproves every excuse. You don't have to chase their storylines or prove your memory against their gaslighting. You just have to stand firm in reality, and reality doesn't bend because someone tells a convincing story. Excuses also reveal something deeper patterns. One excuse might be believable, two might be understandable, but when every action, every mistake, every hurtful word has an excuse, the pattern is undeniable. And when you step back and look at the bigger picture, you realize the excuses were never meant to explain. They were meant to cover. They were never about truth. They were about control. Stripping away excuses doesn't just expose them, it strengthens you. It reminds you that you don't need to justify holding someone accountable. It reminds you that your boundaries don't require permission. It reminds you that truth is simple and simple is powerful. The more you practice seeing through excuses, the less tangled you become in their manipulations. You stop needing them to admit fault. You stop waiting for the perfect explanation. You see what happened, you acknowledge it, and you move forward with clarity. And here's the beautiful part. The truth doesn't get weaker when excuses are removed. It gets stronger. When you look past the noise, you realize the truth doesn't need support. It stands on its own. That's why narcissists fear it so much. They know once you stop entertaining excuses, their influence shrinks. They can no longer twist your reality. They can no longer cloud your vision. They can no longer convince you that what happened didn't happen because you've stripped it down to what's undeniable. Excuses are temporary. Truth is permanent. Excuses are noise. Truth is steady. Excuses scatter in the light. But truth remains no matter how much pressure is applied. And when you learn to stand in that truth calmly, firmly, without needing approval, you become untouchable to their games. A calm question holds more power than an angry lecture. This might sound counterintuitive at first, because when someone is manipulating you, lying to you, or disrespecting you, the natural instinct is to fight back, to raise your voice, to lay out the evidence point by point and lecture them into submission. You think that if you talk long enough or loud enough, they'll finally see what they're doing. But here's the truth. A narcissist doesn't fear your anger. They feed off it. Your frustration, your raised voice, your endless explanations, that's fuel to them. It tells them they've got you hooked. It tells them they've dragged you into the chaos where they operate best. That's why lectures don't work. No matter how well reasoned, no matter how passionate, no matter how many facts you bring to the table, an angry lecture just creates noise, is their home turf. In noise, they can interrupt, twist, distract, and spin. In noise, they can play the victim, painting you as aggressive, unstable, or unfair. You end up looking like the problem, and they slip away without taking an ounce of responsibility. But a calm question, that's different. A calm question doesn't create noise, it creates silence. And silence is something they can't manipulate. A calm question lands like a weight in the room. It doesn't give them fuel, it takes it away. It forces them to respond without the cover of drama. It shifts the balance from you chasing after their lies to them stumbling over their own words. Think about it. If someone makes a vague, cutting remark and you launch into a 5-minute lecture about respect, they'll zone out, mock you, or accuse you of making it a big deal. But if you simply look at them and ask, "What did you mean by that?" in a calm tone, the spotlight shifts. Now they have to answer. Now they have to clarify. And in that moment, they're exposed. The power of a calm question isn't just in what it demands from them. It's in what it says about you. It says you're not reactive. It says you're not going to be baited. It says you're in control of yourself and, by extension, of the interaction. That kind of composure is intimidating to a manipulator because it means they can't pull your strings. They can throw the bait, but you're not biting. And when you don't bite, the game is over. A calm question also puts the truth back at the center of the conversation. Lectures wander. They spiral. They often get lost in emotions and explanations. But a calm question is direct. It's focused. It cuts through the fog. When you ask, "How is that true?" or "Can you explain what you mean?" You force the discussion back to clarity. And clarity is the very thing they're trying to avoid. Another reason a calm question is so powerful is because it exposes without accusing. When you lecture, they can accuse you of attacking. But when you calmly ask a question, you've said nothing aggressive. You've only asked for understanding. That means if they lash out, if they get defensive, it's not because of your tone. It's because the truth is uncomfortable. And anyone watching can see that clearly. Imagine two scenarios. In the first, someone insults you and you explode. How dare you say that to me? Do you know how disrespectful that is? I can't believe you always do this. In the second, someone insults you and you calmly ask, why would you say that? Which one makes them look smaller? Which one makes them stumble? Which one puts the weight of the moment squarely on their shoulders instead of yours? It's the calm question every time. This doesn't mean you suppress your emotions or pretend their words don't hurt. It means you channel your emotions into something stronger, composure. Because anger is loud, but calm is powerful. Calmness isn't weakness, it's control. And when you're in control, you choose the terms of engagement. You decide when and how the conversation moves. That's something a narcissist can't handle because control is what they crave most. And here's the secret. You don't need dozens of calm questions. You only need one asked with steady confidence. One question can unravel their entire argument because it forces them to reveal what they're trying to hide. You don't have to argue them into a corner. You just have to give them the rope and they'll do the rest themselves. Over time, you'll notice how liberating this approach feels. You stop exhausting yourself with endless explanations that go nowhere. You stop wasting energy on lectures that only fuel their defensiveness. Instead, you conserve your strength. You stay clear, and you let the power of a simple question do the work. You're no longer the one spinning in circles. They are. So remember this. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to lecture to prove your point. A calm question delivered with confidence holds more weight than 1,000 angry words. Because anger creates chaos, but calm creates clarity. And clarity every single time exposes what manipulation tries to hide. The goal isn't to win their approval, it's to reveal their pattern. This is where so many people get trapped with a narcissist. They keep trying to win. They try to win arguments, win explanations, win acknowledgement, even win love. It's natural. We all want resolution. We want the person who hurt us to see what they've done. We want them to finally admit the truth, to finally validate our experience, to finally give us the respect we've been asking for. But with a narcissist, that pursuit becomes quicksand. The more you fight for their approval, the deeper you sink, because their approval was never the prize. It was always the bait. Narcissists are masters at dangling the possibility of approval just out of reach. One day they'll give you a compliment just enough to make you feel seen. The next day they'll tear you down. Then when you react, they'll frame you as too sensitive, too emotional, or too difficult. It's a cycle designed to keep you chasing. The more you chase, the more control they have. And the cruel truth is, no matter how perfectly you explain, no matter how calmly you argue, no matter how much you beg for understanding, they will never hand you the approval you're looking for. That's why the goal must shift. It's not about getting them to finally agree with you. It's not about hearing the words, "You're right," from someone who thrives on never giving them. The real goal is to step back and notice the patterns, because patterns tell the story they'll never admit. When you stop chasing approval, you start observing. You see how the same argument plays out over and over? You notice how every time you bring up your feelings, they minimize or deflect. You catch how their apologies are never actually apologies, just ways to move past accountability. You realize that every compliment has a hook. Every gift has strings attached. Every kind gesture is followed by a withdrawal. That's the pattern. And the pattern tells the truth more clearly than their words ever will. Revealing patterns isn't about exposing them to the world, though that sometimes happens naturally. It's about exposing them to yourself. It's about cutting through the confusion they rely on and seeing their behavior for what it is. Because once you see the pattern, you stop personalizing every incident. You stop wondering, what did I do wrong? And start recognizing this is just what they do. That shift takes the power away from them and puts it back in your hands. Think about how much energy gets wasted trying to win approval. Every defensive argument, every long explanation, every attempt to prove your worth, it drains you. But when you stop aiming for approval, you conserve that energy. You redirect it toward clarity, self-respect, and boundaries. Instead of fighting to be understood by someone who refuses to understand, you choose to understand them, their patterns, their tactics, their cycles. And once you see those patterns clearly, you're no longer surprised by their behavior. You're prepared for it. The truth is, narcissists aren't complicated. They just seem complicated when you're caught up in their stories. But step back and you'll see the same strategies on repeat: gaslight, deflect, shift blame, sprinkle charm, withdraw affection, repeat over and over. Different words, same moves. When you strip away the noise, the simplicity of the pattern becomes obvious, and that's powerful because it means you can predict it, you can anticipate it, you can stop being blindsided by it. And here's where the real strength lies. Once you know the pattern, you don't have to fight it anymore. You don't have to argue every insult. You don't have to defend yourself against every accusation. You don't have to prove anything. You can simply recognize the cycle, refuse to step into it, and protect your peace. That's how you win. Not by gaining their approval, but by no longer needing it. This shift also changes the way you see yourself. When you're caught in the trap of chasing approval, you often start doubting your own worth. You start thinking, if I could just explain better, they'd understand. But the reality is, their refusal to validate you isn't a reflection of your value. It's part of their pattern. Once you see that clearly, you stop questioning yourself and start trusting your own clarity again. And here's something they'll never tell you. They notice when you stop chasing. They feel it. They thrive on you needing their approval. And when you step out of that role, their control weakens. They might push harder, escalate, or throw out new tactics. But deep down, they know the dynamic has changed because you're no longer standing in the courtroom of their approval, waiting for a verdict. You've left the courtroom entirely and stepped into clarity. So, no, the goal isn't to win their approval. That's a finish line. They'll always keep moving. The real goal is to reveal their patterns to yourself and sometimes to others, and to stop getting tangled in them. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you can make choices from a place of strength, not desperation. And that clarity is something no narcissist can take from you. One question asked with confidence exposes what they work so hard to hide. Narcissists spend enormous energy building walls of distraction, manipulation, and denial. They craft an image, a mask, a version of themselves that looks polished on the outside, but hides insecurity, fear, and dishonesty underneath. Everything they do, the gaslighting, the blame shifting, the word twisting, is designed to keep you away from what's really going on. They work tirelessly to make sure you never see past the facade. But the truth is, you don't need to tear down the entire wall to expose them. Sometimes all it takes is one clear question asked with confidence to create a crack, and through that crack, the truth shines. Why is a single question so powerful? Because it cuts through the noise. Narcissists thrive on keeping the conversation messy. If they can get you defensive, if they can push you into a long explanation, if they can bury the moment in drama, they win. But one question, calm and focused, doesn't give them that room. It doesn't add more words into the chaos. Instead, it demands clarity. And clarity is the one thing they cannot survive. Think of it this way. Every manipulation they use depends on you losing track of the original point. They insult you. And when you push back, they pivot to you're overreacting. You defend yourself and they say, why are you always so defensive? Before long, the conversation has drifted so far, you're arguing about your tone instead of their insult. That's how they win, by dragging you off course. But when you cut through all of that with a steady question like, what do you mean by that? The spotlight goes right back where it belongs. They can't escape it without exposing themselves. And here's the key. It's not just the question itself, it's the confidence behind it. You can ask the right words, but if you ask them nervously, apologetically, or with visible anger, they'll twist it back on you. Confidence is what locks the door. Confidence says, I'm not here to argue, I'm not here to beg, I'm here to hear the truth. And that steadiness unnerves them because it tells them they no longer control the moment. Watch what happens when you ask a confident question. They'll stall. They'll laugh. They'll act like it's not worth answering. They'll flip it back on you with, "Why are you asking me that?" All of those are avoidance tactics, and avoidance itself is revealing. Their refusal to answer is an answer. Their discomfort in the silence is exposure, because deep down they know the truth. Can't survive under that spotlight. The beauty of one confident question is that it shifts the burden. Normally, they want you to do all the work, defending, explaining, proving, but when you ask a question and then stay quiet, the burden lands on them. They're the ones who now have to scramble, explain, and justify. And because their words are built on deception, they eventually trip over them. You don't need to trap them with clever arguments. You just need to let their own inconsistency unravel in the light of your question. This is why interrogations in courtrooms, boardrooms, or even relationships don't rely on long speeches. They rely on the right questions. Because a good question doesn't just reveal facts, it reveals character. And narcissists can fake charm. They can fake confidence. But when faced with a direct question, they can't dodge the cracks, start to show. The important part to remember is this. Your question isn't meant to win them over. It's not meant to get them to finally admit everything. That's not the goal. The goal is exposure. The goal is clarity. The goal is for you to see with your own eyes that the mask doesn't hold up under pressure. Because once you see that clearly, their power over you weakens. You no longer feel the need to argue with the mask because you recognize it for what it is. And confidence doesn't mean aggression. It doesn't mean you need to ask with attitude or a sharp edge. True confidence is calm. It's steady. It's a quiet conviction that you deserve clarity, and that you don't need to raise your voice to demand it. That calm confidence is exactly what exposes what they're working so hard to hide, because it shows them you're no longer playing the game on their terms. Over time, you'll find that one confident question is more effective than hours of arguments. Arguments only drain you. Questions empower you. Arguments keep you stuck in their cycle. Questions lift you above it. Arguments give them material to twist. Questions leave them with nothing but their own words. And when all they have are their own words, the truth begins to leak through the cracks. So the next time you feel the pull to explain yourself, to lecture, or to prove your worth, pause. Remember, you don't need 100 words. You just need one question. Ask it calmly, ask it with confidence, and then let the silence do the work. Because one question asked with confidence has the power to expose everything they've worked so hard to keep in the dark. At the end of the day, exposing a narcissist isn't about shouting louder, proving harder, or begging for honesty. It's about clarity. It's about refusing to live in the fog of their excuses, their shadows, and their noise. Because when you bring the light of one calm, confident question, you don't just expose them, you protect yourself. And that's the real power here. Not in changing who they are, but in changing how you respond. Not in chasing their approval, but in seeing their pattern. Not in fighting their chaos, but in standing in your clarity. So the next time you feel the pull into their game, remember, you don't need to out-argue them, you don't need to out-shout them, and you don't need to convince them. You just need one question. Ask with calm. Ask with confidence. Ask with the quiet strength of someone who knows the truth. Doesn't need noise. It only needs light. Because in the end, clarity always wins.